On this week's episode of Where We Are, we're going to talk about Nashville and talk directly to parents about what healthy political engagement looks like in the wake of another shooting. We'll also talk about a poll that sent sort of shockwaves through social media and through many conversations that folks were having. And then finally, we'll address a listener question that came in over the transom, Melissa.
Again.
This is Where We Are.
Hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use, and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing, you can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
You're listening to Where We Are. We are the Wheres. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
And Melissa, we're back for another episode. Before we jump to the topics of discussion for the day, just a personal update, which is still can't walk on my leg, but it's feeling a lot better. How is our home life doing, Melissa?
It's weird.
It's weird.
I'm doing everything and you're confined to the bed.
Basically, I've had company a few times, and I'll scoot down the stairs to be in a slightly more acceptable setting, but
then Peg Leg Joe gets tired. It swells up.
Mr. Hopalong has to. Yeah. But we're making it through. I feel so much better this week than I did last week. And again, thank you for all of your prayers and all the support that we've received. Melissa bought me flowers this week. I really appreciate that.
Aldi, baby.
Aldi flowers. They're beautiful.
Yeah, roses at Aldi were $2.49 for 6 roses. I mean, beautiful.
I mean, I didn't even know that. I mean,
you're worth more than $5 in roses. Don't go there, Michael.
I'm just worth discount roses to you, huh?
I mean,
after 11 years of marriage, yeah. All right, Melissa, what do we have on the docket today?
All right, let's talk about the shooting in Nashville that happened this past Monday. Again, we're still praying for the whole community, especially the families affected and all of the parents and all of the kids who experienced what happened, and the community and city itself. And one of the things that I was noticing, and this happens after shootings quite a bit now, because a lot of shootings happen in schools, not just elementary schools, but middle schools and high schools. And we're noticing that some of you might have kids who suddenly feel like, you know what? I want to do something about this. I want to get politically involved in some way. And so Michael and I thought that we would talk about, with an issue like this, or honestly, you could substitute in a lot of different issues that your child, whether they're in middle school or high school, suddenly say, I want to attend this protest, or I want to write to my representative, or I want to donate to this advocacy organization, you know, with my part-time job, you know, the money I'm making there, like, you know, a bunch of different ways that your kid could approach you on this issue. And we know that we have a lot of listeners in Nashville, so this might be you. And you yourself may have never protested or written to your representative, and suddenly your child is coming to you with a request like this. And so we wanted to help you out. So Michael, where would you want to start this conversation for parents on how to feel more prepared, how to feel like they can handle these requests, how they can steward their child through becoming more politically engaged?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is I think it's really important that you walk with your child through what they're processing, how they're processing, and if that includes politics. My general advice, though of course there are exceptions and parents know their children best, of course, but my general advice is to not shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
To not sort of close off that avenue, not just for your child to express themselves, but for don't close down that avenue for you to walk with your child. So that would be the first piece. I think the second piece is it's important to be attentive to the heart behind the advocacy and how it expresses itself. So much of our politics right now is performative, is about self-expression. As the parent, it's helpful to ask questions about, not in a sort of way of squashing it, or not in a way of sort of certainly not patronizing your child, but it's important to ask questions about practicalities. How do you actually, what's the pathway for what you say you want to get done to actually getting it done? Is violent rhetoric, is overheated rhetoric, is a political engagement that's mostly about sort of calling folks names and sort of these very sort of antagonistic modes of activism. Is that the best response to an act of violence? So those would be kinds of questions that I think you could work with your child through. On the practicalities, Melissa, gosh, it could express itself in so many ways. Your kid expressing interest in political engagement in response to what happened in Nashville. Tell them to invite their friends over for a letter writing party, and to your state legislator, to the governor. Attend public forum events about the issue. If you feel safe, and if you feel like your kid is old enough and all those sorts of things, attend a protest and ask your kid to process what they're seeing. What seems to be going on in the hearts of the people who are at this protest? How do the people that they're protesting seem to be reacting to the action that's taking place. So there are, I'm a big fan of throwing your weight behind organizations with shared values when possible, shared ethic when possible. Sometimes that's not, but throwing your weight behind organizations on specific issues that are advocating on the issues and volunteering for them, doing a fundraiser for them. It could be baked goods, could be whatever. So yeah, Melissa, these are some ways, and everything I just mentioned is something that parents can do with their kids. It doesn't have to. There's no reason why parents can't do it. Can't do it with their kids, and I recommend that as much as possible. Parents, you're there to help, in part, to help your child move from their emotions and their feelings and their reactions, and not leave those things behind. Those things are important, but to help them take them into something that's actionable, something that has perspective, something that is cognizant of the community around them. So yeah, Melissa, what would you add to that? What would you say?
I would add, at the end of that list that you just gave, and then help your child to stick with it even when the media attention goes away. Now, obviously, kids are kids, and they might lose interest naturally and normally, and that's okay if they don't end up sticking with it. But if they do show an acumen for it or want to stick with it, encourage them to, even if others around them, forget about it, or, again, the media attention goes away, because it will. And a couple other things, so for example, walking your child through, for example, at a protest, I want to re-emphasize what you're saying, Michael, about, asking your child probing questions, especially afterwards, about what they saw, what were people saying, how were they reacting. Those are all important, because in more public forums like that, or public reactions like that, they're going to see a whole lot of emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of swearing, maybe some inappropriateness, besides peacefulness or, a beauty to it. They could encounter all kinds of scenarios when they attend a protest. And it'll be so important about digging through that with them, so that even from a young age, you're able to start processing politics, political stances, the modes of politics and the modes of the ways people express themselves and how they want to get things done. You're starting to process that from a very early age with your child, which will be so healthy for them as they grow into an adult, about how to actually engage and process politics, and how people around them are processing it maybe differently or the same, that sort of thing. And then the last thing that I would say is that your kids, especially with guns and with shootings and that type of issue in particular, the thoughts and prayer narrative is as predominant as ever, and your child is going to be confronted with those narratives and people dismissing prayer, saying, prayer doesn't work, that sort of thing. And I think it's deeply important that to pray with your child about this issue.
Yes.
And, we might be talking, we might be talking about your 14-year-old, your 15-year-old, your 16, 17, 18-year-old. Maybe you haven't prayed with them in a while because it's something that, they're old enough to be doing on their own. And there's that sort of dynamic with your child. And maybe you haven't prayed with them in a while. Pray with them about this issue. Show them how to ask God to step into this issue, because when it comes to politics, another sort of healthy habit that you can start with your child, especially if they want to become civically or politically engaged on an issue, is to show them that Jesus is not outside of this issue that they care about, that Jesus is actually walking with them through this issue, cares about it, especially if your child cares about it, Jesus will care about it too. And God is in the mix when it comes to politics and isn't outside of it. You know, Michael talks about this all the time, that we have a culture that sort of separates the two, and they're not separate at all. They're really not. And so to pray with your child also shows that they can sort of, you know, go to Jesus with their problems and their questions.
It also shows them that they don't need to go outside of Jesus to address the things that are burning on their hearts. And that is one of the main things here, right? Like, if as a parent you shut down sort of their interest in politics as a response to this issue, or really any other, or if you suggest that, you know, that's not how Christians respond to things like this, they're not going to just accept that. What they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, I guess my parents, I guess my faith are not up to the task of what society seems to be demanding at this moment. And so I'm so glad you raised that. Melissa, I won't go on thoughts and prayers, though I'm so, though I am tempted, maybe I'll just repeat or paraphrase what I shared on social media, which is, look, well, actually, let me just say it bluntly, directly, and use whatever credentials I have to make the point, which is a whole lot of people who have no political experience, have not accomplished anything in politics, mostly just have keyboard opinions on politics. They're the ones going on and on about thoughts and prayers. Da, da, da. I've worked in the White House. I've worked on some of the toughest issues that public policy has to offer. And here's what I can tell you. There is not a public policy challenge in this country that would not benefit from more earnest prayer. And there is no public policy challenge in this country that would benefit from less prayer. So yeah, Melissa, you raised it. I'm going to address it. But that is something that you could take, parents listening, that's something that you could take to your kids. Our kids need to know that we have confidence in prayer, and that prayer isn't just something that we do as a ritual or something that we do because, well, these are our family values. No, prayer matters no matter what your family values are. prayer matters no matter what your pastor says or what church you're going to. Prayer stands on its own. Prayer is real, and so that's the kind of thing. These are the kinds of conversations that, as I go around to college campuses, and I've been speaking at some high schools lately, it's these cracks in the confidence of the family infrastructure that are unmooring young adults. And so we need to be attentive to where those cracks are appearing and make sure that we're not inadvertently lending credence to the idea that our faith is not up to the challenges of the day.
We'll end that one there. I think that's a perfect ending.
Great. What else we have, Melissa?
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
I'm Mo Rocca, and I'm excited to announce Season 4 of my podcast, Mobituaries. I've got a whole new bunch of stories to share with you about the most fascinating people and things who are no longer with us. From famous figures who died on the very same day, to the things I wish would die, like buffets. All that and much more. Listen to Mobituaries with Mo Rocca wherever you get your podcasts.
We wanted to discuss a new poll from the Wall Street Journal and an organization called NORC, or I'm going to call it NORC. Brand new poll that came out for 2023 comparing to 2019. 4 years ago was the last time it was run. And this poll went viral on social media because it shows a major decline in how Americans value things like patriotism, religion, having children, and community involvement. Meanwhile, the value of money is the only thing that has gone up in the past 4 years. But patriotism, religion, having children, community involvement have declined anywhere from like 20 to 40 percentage points. And so the question is, what is going on? How could we have a decline like that so quickly? And so there's an Echelon Heights pollster, Patrick Ruffini, who wrote a Substack pointing out that this polling is just sort of feeding into the declinist narrative that we have right now, because he dug into the data and saw that in 2019, the mode of how they collected this data was through a telephone panel. And in 2023, it was through an online panel, which when you collected via different modes, you can get different data. And so that might explain these huge drops in valuing these different areas of American life. And Michael, you had something that you wanted to say about this poll.
Well, so Patrick is exactly right that, and I should note that the Wall Street Journal piece that released the research noted this difference at the bottom of the article. Said, now it said it could account for some degree of the change. But believe that it sort of conveyed that the difference in how the survey was done didn't sort of make up for all of the decline. So, but Patrick's right. The way data is collected, the way survey information is collected, can affect the results, which should tell us something. In other words, if they had released this data without benchmarking it to previous years, though, that criticism wouldn't mean anything. I mean, polling is moving to an online sort of mode, and so that's just what the best polling, what it's basically gonna look like moving forward. So I will say it did confirm my bias or expectation. Like I think there clearly has been a decline. Whether the decline has been that steep and those kinds of values, okay, let's get some more research on those types of points. But I think a decline is real. Now, one of the reasons why online gets different results than telephone is that people feel more comfortable expressing their thoughts as they are online because they're not having to tell another person over the phone. And so that's what Patrick Ruffini sort of gets into. Well, people are, it's possible, the hypothesis is, people are more comfortable saying that having kids isn't of value to them because they, on an online survey, because there's less risk of facing sort of stigma or judgment as opposed to having a someone on the other end of the telephone who's asking you these questions. So I, all that to say, I think these results actually reflect an honest American sort of appraisal of these things. It reminds me, Melissa, if you know, when I was in campaign world, when I was in politics, you're always trying to get to like, okay, people will say they value one thing, but how do you get to something that's truer, or something that's more concrete? And so, you know, if you asked people, in 2008, do you think religion should be valued, or do you identify as Christian? Right, 70-80% of Americans say yes. But there was a Gallup poll, that's something that I used quite a bit, briefing very senior officials and throughout my time in the White House and campaign world. And Gallup had a poll. The question was something like, Melissa, does your faith guide your daily decision making? Mm-hmm. And that was 41%. Now, interestingly, Melissa, that 41%, that's pretty close to the answer that this Wall Street Journal poll had on whether people value. So that was one thing that stuck out to me. Okay, so this 41% has been a benchmark for me for a long time, as just like I thought of that 41% as sort of, okay, it's 41% of Americans who are going to reliably be considering their faith when they make decisions in their life, that they're actually motivated by it, which is different from if you go from 75% or 80% of Americans identifying as Christian. You're gonna get some things wrong there. This Wall Street Journal poll seems to get at that, at this, what do you really value in your personal life? So that's one thing. Melissa, I'll let you jump in. But I think the other sort of meta point I wanted to make was, I do think there's been a collapse of meaning in American life, particularly shared meaning, and this idea that you can assume there are things that you can assume other people are going to value as you do. I mean, Melissa, I'm not sure if you covered it in your overview, but even the value of tolerance, the idea of tolerance has declined. Particularly,
I didn't cover that in my overview.
Even the value of tolerance has declined broadly. So I'm so glad Patrick Ruffini wrote the post. I do think it adds some question marks around the exact nature and sort of the exact percentage of decline over the last 30 years on these kinds of questions. But I think we just know, and I think it's just evident in American culture that there has been this collapse of meaning and the expectation of shared meaning from neighbor to neighbor. But Melissa, with that, I'll turn it back to you for any thoughts you have.
I mean, that last point you just made is huge. Like, I want to chew on that for like a day. We could have a whole podcast episode on that. I find that really interesting, but I'll put a pin in that one. But I've run public opinion polling myself. I've had to create surveys. I've worked with Ipsos, one of the biggest, firms out there for running public opinion surveys. And yes, the way that you write a question, having gone through draft after draft after draft after draft of constructing these questions, yes, the way that you ask them, like specific words and word order, matters so deeply to how people then interpret that question and then give you an answer. And the answers sometimes that you offer, and the order that you offer them and also affect the responses that you get. And so, yeah, I think it's very interesting that people could be viewing these values very personally rather than on a more like aggregate or like macro level. And then Patrick does mention in his piece a little bit that COVID could be at play here, that, the last survey was 2019 and now this is 2023, that COVID with isolation and loneliness and inflation and, economic uncertainty with, that plays into a lot of people deciding whether or not they're going to have children. and if they have time to get involved in the community. I mean, if you're on lockdown for like a good like year and a half, 2 years, and some people are still locked down, yeah, your opinion towards community involvement's not going to increase. So I think COVID is actually an underlier here that, you know, Patrick laments. And of course, this is what happens with public opinion surveying, is that you can't ask a lot of follow-up questions on, okay, you've said, you know, having children isn't a personal value to you. Why? You can't follow up with a why. You don't have the ability for people to sort of pick an A, B, or C simple finite answers to questions like that, or, you know, why,
which is telling in itself, right? And goes to this. So if people can't respond to survey questions that that the American people generally have responded to in the past with affirmation, because you basically know what the question is asking. It suggests something about the American psyche that now, well, it depends on what you mean by patriotism. It depends on what you mean by personally value having kids. Like I wouldn't want to suggest that those who didn't value having kids were, like it just suggests something interesting going on in the American psyche.
The nuanceification of the American psyche.
Well, yeah, and just the it's one of those things that to go to a trope, it reminds me of wealthy progressive elites who won't express values about marriage or family sort of broadly, but their own lives actually reflect that. In fact, they value these things very much. That they just don't. They're worried about making such. They're worried about the public application of such values. They're worried that it might not be okay to value these kinds of things, and that kind of sort of reminds me of parts of this conversation.
I can definitely see that one. But let's end that conversation there, and let's jump into our final conversation. And this is on Governor Ron DeSantis and his relationship with Disney World and the fight that has been going on there for quite a while. We had a listener write in on Spotify this past week asking us to go through what is going on. So, Michael, do you have the deets?
Yes. So basically, this has been like a year-long public feud that started over what has become known as, what has been named by progressives as, the Don't Say Gay law. You might remember the Disney CEO said that he had conversations with Governor DeSantis and said publicly that he thought the bill, I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but he basically gave his go-ahead on the bill or didn't express objections to it. He said, talked with the governor about it, don't have objections. He faced a ton of both internal pressure from Disney and then external pressure from LGBT rights groups, and the Disney CEO flip-flopped on the issue. He also gave permission. He also let other Disney officials sort of mobilize in opposition to the bill. So DeSantis, thinks, did my due diligence here. The Disney's CEO, I'm assuming, told him personally before he said publicly, we're not gonna. The bill is fine. Like, your explanation makes sense. Then all of a sudden, he's got, that commitment falls through, and so that's like where this starts. DeSantis decides he's going to sort of make an example of Disney. And like the positive sort of rationale for this is, from DeSantis's perspective, is, look, Disney gets a ton of benefits from the state of Florida. The state of Florida has helped to make Disney what it is. And we'll get into some of the benefits. But if they're going to sort of take that largesse and then turn it back on the state of Florida to sort of lobby the state of Florida, not only on bills that are directly related or sort of very closely and obviously related to their business interests, but to lobby on a whole range of issues, including something like LGBT legislation, then the state shouldn't be freely sort of subsidizing that. You're basically subsidizing your own opposition. So that's the thought here. It's a very similar thought behind what DeSantis is doing in Florida on education, which is, wait, these universities, these colleges receive millions and millions of dollars of state benefits, and they're churning out students who oppose the policies of the Republican state government. So that's the rationale here. That's the DeSantis, that's the sort of conservative rationale behind these moves. So after the Don't Say Gay bill spat, DeSantis looks at, so basically Disney in Florida operates as its own tax zone. Now, what this means is that basically Disney property, they get to manage their own fire protection, policing, sort of road maintenance, and importantly, development planning, which means that they don't need to go to external government officials. They have jurisdiction over more than Disney. They have constituency concerns that are greater than Disney to make decisions about what they do on their property. Basically, there's a separate board that approves these kinds of decisions. Disney has been able to make appointments to that board, which means, again, that Disney basically runs its own magical kingdom in Florida. What DeSantis said he was going to do was that he was going to basically take over that board and therefore reduce Disney's autonomy. A real threat to Disney. The expenses, even if they ended up being able to do eventually everything that they wanted to do, just the expenses, the headaches of having to get approval from a board with members that had various interests on it, some of whom would likely be antagonistic given the spat, be a huge pain. But it was a really was a really effective sort of counterpunch from DeSantis, and it was DeSantis sort of taking a stand and saying, "Look, I'm gonna, if I could squeeze Disney, then no one's gonna sort of mess with me. Disney's a titan."
But then this past Wednesday, something was discovered by this newly formed board.
Correct. So, exactly right, Melissa. So they took over this board, but before the board turned over, in public hearings that according to Disney operated as legally and as these meetings should, the Disney had pushed through a development agreement that would limit the board's. So through the board, Disney pushes through a development agreement that would limit the board's power. And so the new board comes on board. Sorry for the double usage there, but the new board comes on and realizes that their power has been significantly limited.
Their second meeting, they realize, hold up, something called a Declaration of Restrictive Covenants has been signed, which allows Disney to have the final say on all their property and requires the board to inform Disney of any plans of alterations without conditions or delays.
Wild. So that's where it stands now. DeSantis has not, as of this recording, has not spoken publicly about it. Some officials in Florida have said, this is clearly against the spirit of the law. This is sort of clearly, corporate maneuvering to avert the will of the state government and therefore the people. But Disney says, no. This happened through the processes that the government itself set up and approved in every proper channel. And so after months of DeSantis sort of doing victory laps and taking sort of a lot of credit for taking the culture war fight to Disney and winning, it's very possible, to say the least, that Disney quietly was outmaneuvering DeSantis. And so that's the background to the listener who asked about those dynamics. Now, obviously, we try to answer as many listener questions as we can, and so that's the main reason why we took up this issue. Of course, Melissa, it's relevant because DeSantis. It's especially relevant because DeSantis, it seems quite evident, is building a presidential campaign for 2024. Be very interesting
to see how he responds to this.
Be very interesting to see how he responds. Very interesting to see if Donald Trump, how quickly Donald Trump takes up this potential defeat for DeSantis and uses it to suggest that for all of his bluster, etc., Ron DeSantis doesn't know how to take on liberals, etc. Only Donald Trump does. That is definitely on the horizon. If DeSantis doesn't figure out a way to reel this back in.
Mm-hmm. There was one minor detail left out called the rule against perpetuities that this new declaration has created. This is the sort of pettiness that is really starting to come in. I mean, the pettiness has been there for a while, but I mean, really hitting ahead is that in this new declaration, the rule against perpetuities states that the declaration that, now this board is now being, run on, governed on, whatever, will continue until 21 years after the death of the last survivor of the descendants of King Charles III. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's petty.
Yeah, that's petty. The petty level 1000.
Yeah. So that's that. Just real quickly, since we're talking about 2024, no major changes in the field since last episode. We haven't seen, I mean, it looks like Pence continues to get closer and closer to announcing. He's been doing CNN town halls. He's doing big sit downs on Fox News. But right now it's Haley, Trump, and then sort of some outsider, an outsider candidate. But I don't expect that to last. Actually, Melissa, I don't expect it to last through April. I think
me neither. I think April's going to be the month of at least a couple more people jumping in.
I think that's right. Okay, Melissa, I think that's all we have for this episode. Anything else you want to put on the table before we sign off?
Nope, want to clear the table.
All right, that's the episode. Thanks for listening to Where We Are. We'll talk to you on the Morning 5 this week. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
It's the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up. Yeah, I still wanna turn up. All I wanna